Recording in three, two, and one.
Why? Why in the name of all that is holy on the great planet of Barsoom can they not make a decent movie out of these novels? They're 100 years old.
Welcome to episode 141 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 141. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, and the up and the down, the good and the bad. Welcome to another week, everybody. We appreciate you all being here. I watched all of the What If season 2.
Oh, you did? I haven't even hit it up yet.
Not as good as season 1.
Okay.
So there, can't remember if the first one's connected to everything or not. I don't think the first one's connected to all of it, but all the other episodes are pretty much connected, going towards the end, and it they're setting up for a season 3. This season centered largely around Peggy Carter.
Okay. I love
Um,
Peggy Carter.
I do too. It's a really good character, but this season centered largely around here. Plus a character I'd never heard about.
Who?
Kahori? Kahori, I think her name is. Um, I don't remember. I think it's Kahori, but anyway, I didn't think they were as good as season 1. I can tell you that for sure. Actually fell asleep during one of them. But I got through those. Give it a watch. Let us know what you
Okay.
think on it. I think they're interesting enough, but they did a much better job with season 1 for sure. But yeah, that's all I have. What do you got?
Not a lot going on here. Finally finishing up some of the construction, even though it's been, like 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost there.
That's good. I'm glad. I know you'll be happy to be done with that. I remember when we
Yeah,
did some remodeling of our former house. I got tired of being under construction all the time.
all the time.
Yes, it gets annoying and ready to be done with it and everything. So, um, awesome. Well, I I am not as familiar with this topic that you're talking about, except for the movie, and I'll
Uh-huh.
save my opinions when we get to that. But
There
Zig, I
were
will let you.
actually two.
I was completely unaware of that. Zig, I'll let you
Yeah.
take over on the nerdy side of the house.
Okay, today we're going to talk about John Carter of Mars. I know people are like, oh, that movie wasn't that great. You're right. That movie wasn't that great.
It
It's
wasn't, and that's the thing.
it's
I didn't like the movie.
it's based on a series of novellas from the early 20th century. Um, so I need to borrow the pod back machine for a second. We're going to go back to the early 90s. I'm reading a lot of Robert Heinlein just because that's what I was into at the time. And I pick up Number of the Beast, and they keep referring to these characters, John Carter and Deja Thoris, and all this other stuff. And they mention this series of books. One of the characters was actually named Deja Thoris. Um, that Edgar Rice Burroughs, creator of Tarzan, wrote back in the early teen or late teens, early 20s. It was called ostensibly it's John Carter of Mars, and it's a fictional Virginia soldier who acts as the initial protagonist of the Barsoom series. A veteran of the American Civil War, he is transported to the planet Mars, called Barsoom by its inhabitants, where he becomes a warrior battling various mythological beasts, alien armies, and malevolent foes. It was originally created in 1911. The character has appeared in novels and short stories, comic books, television shows, and films, including the 2012 feature film John Carter, which marked the 100th anniversary of the character's first appearance. The novellas were A Princess of Mars, The Gods of Mars, The Warlords of Mars, Thuvia, Maid of Mars, The Chessmen of Mars, The Mastermind of Mars, Fighting Man of Mars, Swords of Mars, Synthetic Men of Mars, Lana of Gathol, and John Carter of Mars. So like 12 little novellas. They're like 150 pages a piece, real short, but they're great adventure stories. Um, and again, I picked them up because I was reading Number of the Beast, and I picked up the first one. I thought it was great, and I read the second one, and it was great, and the third one, and it was great. Um, a lot of pseudoscience going on here, but again, they were written in 1911. We hadn't been to Mars yet. But the idea was that Mars is inhabited, but it is slowly dying. Um, it had once had water all over it. Now it only has water in a few places. And the people that live there are basically contending with living on a desert world with lower gravity than we have here. So there are lots of airships. They have some of their science is way behind ours. It's from the Bronze Age. Some of their science is, you know, a couple of 100 years in the future. They know of Earth. They know that people came from Earth originally. There are also inhabitants that developed on Mars, you know, as actual inhabitants, but they all live in the same society now. You get remnants of ancient cities that used to be by the sea, which no longer exist. It's on the rim of a canyon in a desert that was originally an inland sea or lake. Um, it just really, really fascinating. Mostly, it's an adventure story. A lot of sword and sandal, a lot of damsels in distress, things like that nature. Again, written in 1911. Um, but the lead character, John Carter, he basically he's being chased down by a bunch of bandits. I think in the original film they were natives because he was where he wasn't supposed to be. Um, and this originally appeared in a pulp magazine. It was collected into a novella called The Princess of Mars in 1917, but he originally started the story in 1911. So John Carter sort of uh, goes into this cave and finds this weird mummy there who appears to be alive. But it looks like he's been there for 100 years because he's covered in cobwebs. And he touches this spot in the wall and he's transported to Mars. At the end of Princess of Mars, he ends up being transported back like 12 years later, and he is covered in dust and cobwebs and things, but he's still alive. Um, the book centers around a young, well, proponently Edgar Rice Burroughs reading the stories from his uncle about what happened to him and how he's been trying to get back to Mars for years and years and years. And it's after his uncle's funeral. By the end of the book, he goes into the crypt where his uncle is, and he's not dead. He's gone back to Mars. And the next book picks up with him getting back to Mars after a period of time. Um, the world of Mars is ruled by the second book, the gods of Mars, which are a group of humans who basically started a religion to kind of keep themselves on top. Um, and everybody goes to this one basically underground sea when they die. What they don't realize is the the humans who are there are eating them when they get there or using them as slave labor. Um, the third, you've got the Warlord of Mars, where he basically returns from what is essentially the afterlife of Mars. Um, and then the story kind of takes the story kind of takes from the persona of the Princess of Mars, Deja Thoris, and John Carter's son, Cathoris, and it's his story. And it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. But again, there's 12 books in the Barsoom series. Um, he wants to initially he meets this Martian princess who's been captured named Deja Thoris. She is a princess of the city of Helium. Um, but after several years of marriage, he sacrifices himself to save Barsoom because there are these giant They're these giant temples that also produce oxygen, which is what's keeping the planet alive, um, because it's slowly losing all its atmosphere. Um,
I'm just as bored as the movie right now.
are you really? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to find a. I'm trying to explain it. It's hard to explain. I've got a bunch of notes, but I don't want to just read a bunch of notes. So on Mars, there are the Green Men of Mars. The Green Men of Mars are the original um, inhabitants of Mars. They're very tall. They're insect-like. They have six appendages. That's two arms and or four arms and two legs. Um, and they are essentially wild men. They live nomadic lifestyles. You have what are called the Red Men of Mars, which are the people of helium, because they are very tan because they live in a desert. You have what they call the Yellow Men of Mars. They live up in the polar north, um, and it's just as descriptive. You have the Therns, um, which are the purported to be the gods. They're very pale because they live in the under the underground kingdom. They are beholden to the first men of Mars, or the dark men of Mars. There are people who basically look aboriginal. They're very, very dark skinned, and they actually control everything over the Therns. The people on Mars live a long time because, again, they have this really incredible science, but they also fight with swords because the planet is dying and being kept alive by artificial means. Um, there are great beasts that they fight. The Green Men of Mars ride these amazing beasts, which are not only mounts, but they're also ferocious fighters. A lot of sentient creatures on Mars. And again, there's a bunch of humans, but they're basically just depending on where they live, that's what they look like. And they've got this weird caste system. But again, it's because the planet is slowly dying. Um, there's very little water, but there are canals that run back and forth between the great cities. The great cities often will fight each other, but John Carter is really good friends with Deja Thoris's great grandfather, who looks the same age as John Carter, because they have very, very long lives. Um, Another character, one other Earthman, Ulysses Paxton, is able to travel to Mars via the method Carter used. And he meets up with Thuvia, made of Mars, which is the grandson of, or the granddaughter of John Carter. No, Thuvia is John Carter's daughter. Their daughter, Ulysses Paxton, and Thuvia is Lenal of Gothel.
I'm confused.
But yeah, this is just great little adventure stories where people are running around fighting half naked women, monsters, uh, damsels in distress. Uh, there are a few strong female characters. The leader of the First Men of Mars is actually a very, very, very old woman. Um, they say she's like 5,000 years old. Um, but the thing about this series, it has inspired so many other science fiction writers. It inspired, some of these ideas inspired the Fremen uh, for Frank Herbert. Um, Star Wars gets some inspiration for it, the fighting with the swords and things like that. Star Trek got some inspiration from it, as well as Robert Heinlein, Larry Niven, Jack McDevitt, all these other science fiction writers all read this stuff when they were kids, and he's kind of the godfather of the science fiction movement. I mean, Forrest Ackerman. The problem comes with this is they tried to make movies of this in the well, again, about 10 years ago.
Well, and you said that there were two of them. One
Yes.
got released. As I'm looking online, two
Yep.
got canceled.
No, no, no. There was another movie called Princess of Mars with Anthony Sabato.
Really? Why is it not listed as a John Carter movie?
Yeah. Yeah. It went straight to video. Thuvia was played by oh my God. She used to be an adult film actress and moved over to regular film.
Which character?
She played Deja Thoris.
Lynn Collins.
No, 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 no. This was in the one with Anthony, the Princess of Mars movie with Anthony Sabato. I've
Yeah,
got it
I'm
here.
looking at it. Princess of Mars. And it shows Deja Thoris.
The 2009 film Princess of Mars, which Tracy Lords
Oh, oh,
like
okay.
Deja Thoris. It was actually some of the stuff with the Green Men of Mars was actually better in that than it was in the 2012 film John Carter, which was played by Taylor Kitsch, and Lynn Collins played Deja Thoris,
Huh.
which was done by Disney and failed miserably. Bob Clampett, the animator, wanted to produce a full-length cartoon of John Carter of Mars in the 1930s and talked with Burroughs about it. Several seconds of animation do appear in the supplemental material for the home video version of the Disney film. I have included some of that in our YouTube playlist. Um, they threw a lot of money at this movie. But I get this sense that when they made it, they didn't read the source material.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's almost like uh it's almost like they were afraid to go off on it because it was from the turn of the century. You know, there's some weird ideas there. He kind of portrays, you know, Native Americans as savages in the first few pages. Um, Turns out John Carter was someplace he wasn't supposed to be anyway. So, you know, calling them savages is, you know, not really nice. Um, because they were defending their territory. He was someplace where he wasn't supposed to be. And John Carter also crops up. He makes two appearances in Alan Moore's The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The first is a story by Alan uh, and Sundell Vale, which they appear at the end of volume one. In this story, Moore claims that H.P. Lovecraft's Randolph Carter is a descendant of John Carter. Carter also appears in the beginning of volume two, helping the Barsoomians fight against the Martians from the War of the Worlds. Um, the same scenario also appears in the Burroughs entry in the War of the Worlds Global Dispatch anthology. It includes one of the protagonists of Robert Heinlein's The Number of the Beast, Captain Zebediah John Carter, whose wife is also Deja Thoris or Dee Dee. The similarity in names is noted with the novel since all of the major characters are fans of vintage science fiction. In Saturn's Children by Charles Strauss, Barsoom and Carter City are names of the settlements on Mars. And in Philip Jose Farmer's World of Tears novels, the moon circling the World of Tears is modeled after Barsoom from Edgar Rice Burroughs' novel as an homage, which Farmer openly admits in the third book of the series. Dan Simon's Hyperion, as well, with Frederick Casson turned 18, he was offered the choice of serving as a Martian polar work camp or enlisting with the John Carter Brigade, a volunteer task force seeking to aid forces against the Glennon High Rebellion on Mars. In Harry Turtledove's Southern Victory series final novel, Settling Accounts, in at the death, a character named John Carter of the Tarkus estate, because the green man that he becomes friends with is named Tarkus, appears before a U.S. general after having protected African Americans from genocide taking place elsewhere. And the Object Compass in E. Doc Smith's Skylark series is very similar to the Barsoomian Destination Compass. So yeah, a lot of people have used the John Carter persona. And you in the novellas, you also get to explore other parts of Mars. There is a small section of jungle which they explore in the Chessmen a little bit. The Chessmen are another sentient species of Mars where they're basically parasitic heads that basically build synthetic bodies to walk around on. um, sort of tentacled beasts. Um, but I mean, through the novellas, you discovered that Mars at one point was a was an egalitarian society with all these sentient beings, and that as the atmosphere started to go and some of the water started to leave, it descended into chaos. This was 10,000 years before John Carter even got there. Um, and what you're dealing with now is a post-apocalyptic society, and a lot of people in the post-apocalyptic genre kind of portray their characters and things like the Barsoomians. Um, so it inspired people that way as well. I love the series of books, particularly the ones in the 1990s, where the covers were designed by some well-known science fiction uh, painters. I think they're awesome. Um, I love the stories. And I've gone back and read them again 5 or 6 years ago. I have a 2 volume set, the first 2 books. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Just reading through it, it was like magic again. Um, but yeah. Oh, Michael Whelan was the one that did the. Most people think of Boris Vallejo and things like that. Michael Whelan did the covers in the early to mid '90s. Those are the ones I love the best because they really portray the Green Men of Mars as epic and amazing. But yeah, that's basically it for John Carter Mars. I know I haven't said much. Um, oh yeah, just trying to sneak by.
Like I said,
uh,
I saw the first I saw the movie John
mhm.
Carter, and I was bored to tears. So I didn't like it at all. Did not like it at all, and so I wouldn't have gone on to a second one, even though I
Well, you
know.
might want to check out The Princess of Mars. It's a little bit closer to the book, but they didn't have half the budget that Disney had. So
Mhm. Well, and it was a box office bomb too, because
yeah.
final reports were that John Carter cost, including marketing, 350 million
Hmm.
to make, and it made less than that in the box office. It made less than
Yes.
300 million, and they
Yeah.
said it would have needed to have made 600 million in order to be a success, and it led to resignations at Disney,
Yes.
and another thing is the marketing of it was considered extremely terrible.
Hmm.
And what was not known at the time is when Disney basically didn't put a lot behind this, because behind the scenes at the time Disney was already in talks to buy Lucasfilms.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes. It's like, okay, we're gonna start doing this. Yeah. And oh hey, we're gonna buy Lucasfilms. We don't need to showcase John Carter of Mars now,
right,
even though they've been working on it for 3 or 4 years.
right,
Um, the movie just wasn't that good.
no,
I've watched it a couple of times. Again, I like the cast. Um, Willem Dafoe as Tars Tarkas is perfect. I like the designs and everything else of the Green Men of Mars, but they don't really get into the civilization, and they don't talk about how, because when they're in the opening scene, when he comes across the Green Men and they're in that abandoned city, they don't ever go into the abandoned city and see the pictures of the wall of the Green Men and the Red Men and the Therns and everybody else basically all living together, because they're great big murals all over these cities, and how they used to sit at the edge of the sea. None of that. None of that at all. And they could have done that with 2 minute shot. No, instead
mm-hmm,
they had to have the Green Men fighting, which they do. They do a lot, but I mean there's more to it than that.
right. Well, you know how I feel about it. So, listeners, go out there, see John Carter for yourself, read the books, see what you feel about it.
Yeah.
Um, you can let us know.
Yeah.
Email us, get us on Facebook, anything like that. Let us know how you felt about it, and we'll go from there.
Yes. I will say this. I love the books. particularly up till about 5 or 6.
Hmm.
It kind of dropped off there, but toward the end they picked right back up.
Hmm.
The first 4 books are amazing. I mean, again, they're novellas. They're tiny, but I mean, Edgar Rice Burroughs' ability to paint the picture of that society is what makes that so wonderful.
Hmm. That's cool. Speaking of books, completely not related at all, but I was just looking some stuff up online the other day, uh, and I was reading the reviews for Ready Player Two,
Uh-huh.
because I was curious what the masses thought about Ready Player Two. Because Ready Player One, I love Ready Player One. I love
Yeah.
that book. I've read it time and time and time again. And while the movie strayed from the book quite a bit, I thought it was still a decent enough movie that I've watched a few times because I
Uh-huh.
just I just enjoy it.
It's a
I
good
think the
flick.
visuals are really good. Ready Player Two, I didn't like.
You didn't like the book at all?
I didn't really like the book at all. I thought it was very derivative. I hated what they did with the characters. Um, and as I was reading reviews online, most people agreed with me on that because there is a Ready Player Two movie in the works.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I wish instead of that, because I didn't think that was that great of a book, I wish they would do a movie over another of Ernst Cline's books, Armada.
Oh,
Uh,
I'm sorry, what?
Armada.
Armada. Okay.
You need to read Armada. Basically, kind of think The Last Starfighter
Uh-huh.
taken up a notch.
Oh, nice.
Um, you give Armada a read. It's really really good. I enjoyed Armada a lot, but Ready Player Two I didn't. So sorry, I didn't mean to go off tangent on that. It just
No,
reminded
that's
me
fine.
I was
We were talking about books, man.
researching about doing some research on Ready Player Two just the other day.
Nice.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you
You're
for your
quite
time
welcome.
on that. I appreciate it. Even if I don't like the movies, I appreciate the time you take on that.
You should try the novellas, man. Like I said, they're
Maybe,
150 pages.
maybe I might. With that, I'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off all that's interesting: Wikipedia, New York Times, the New York Times, and Forensics Tales. And this is the story of John List.
John
You
List.
familiar with him?
I've heard the name.
I don't doubt it. It's been a while since we've covered A Family Annihilator. So
Hmm.
here's another one for you, and he's one of the most famous ones.
Okay. That's
Very
probably why
famous.
I've heard his name.
I'm sure you have. So on November 9th, 1971, John List shot his wife, his mother, and his 3 children. Then he made a sandwich, drove to the bank, and disappeared for 18 years.
Holy shit.
Well, so born in Bay City, Michigan, John List was the only child of German American parents John Frederick List and Alma Barbara Florence List. Like his father, John was a devout Lutheran and Sunday school teacher. He graduated from Bay City Central High School in 1943, and then that same year he enlisted in the United States Army and served as a laboratory technician during World War II. His father died in 1944, and then List was discharged in 1946, and he enrolled in the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting, and was commissioned a second lieutenant through the ROTC. In November of 1950, as the Korean War escalated, John List was recalled to active military service. At Fort Eustis in Virginia, he met Helen Morris Taylor, who was the widow of an infantry officer killed in action in Korea, who lived nearby with her daughter Brenda. John and Helen married on December 1st, 1951, in Baltimore, Maryland, and the family moved to Northern California. Later, according to trial testimony, Helen had pressured List into marriage by falsely claiming she was pregnant, then insisted they marry in Maryland, which did not require the premarital syphilis test mandated in most other states at the time. Though her health progressively deteriorated, she said nothing to List or her physicians until 1961, when a thorough examination revealed the condition. And by then, progression of the disease combined with her excessive alcohol consumption had, according to testimony, quote, transformed her into an unkept and paranoid recluse who frequently and often publicly humiliated List, comparing his sexual prowess unfavorably with that of her first husband.
Hmm.
The Army, recognizing John's accounting skills, reassigned him to the Finance Corps, and after completion of his second tour in 1952, John List worked for an accounting firm in Detroit and then as an audit supervisor at a paper company in Kalamazoo where his 3 children were born. By 1959, John had risen to general supervisor of the company's accounting department, but Helen, an alcoholic, had become increasingly unstable due to syphilis that she had contracted from her first husband, which again she did not disclose to John before their marriage. In 1960, his stepdaughter Brenda married and left the household, and John moved with the remainder of his family to Rochester, New York to take a job with Xerox. There, he eventually became director of accounting services, and in 1965, he accepted a position as vice president and comptroller at a bank in Jersey City, New Jersey, and moved with his wife, children, and mother into Breeze Knoll, which was a 19-room Victorian mansion located at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey. The New Jersey mansion he inhabited included a ballroom, marble fireplaces, and a Tiffany skylight.
Wow.
John List appeared to be the perfect son, husband, and father. He worked hard as an accountant at a nearby bank to provide for his family. John and his family were the embodiment of the American dream in 1965. They attended church every Sunday as devout Lutherans, and John taught Sunday school, as I'd mentioned before. And everything looked great on the surface, but almost nothing was as it seemed. In 1971, John lost his job at the bank at age 46, and subsequent jobs didn't pan out. He couldn't bear to tell his family about the loss of income, and to avoid sharing this humiliating development with his family, John engaged in the same routine and dress as when employed, leaving home each morning on schedule and spending the day at job interviews or at the Westfield train station reading newspapers until it was time to come home. He was also secretly skimming money from his mother's bank accounts to pay the mortgage. He refused to go on welfare as it would entail excruciating embarrassment in the community and violate the principles of self-sufficiency that he learned at his father's knee. As the year progressed, the family's financial problems became more strained. John encouraged his children to seek part-time work, ostensibly to teach them maturity and responsibility, but in actuality to help keep the family financially solvent. Furthermore, his children were dabbling with marijuana and theater, both of which John viewed as rather unchristian, and he was watching his perfect life unravel. It's really kind of hard to believe the solution he arrived would have been more acceptable to his father, but John List would later say it seemed the only option, the murder of his mother, wife, and children. On November 9th, 1971, John put what was a carefully calculated plan into action. A few weeks before, he had ordered a family meeting where he cryptically asked them each what type of funeral they would want. In the days prior, he had mailed notes to friends, co-workers, and teachers of his various family members, offering up cover stories as to why they wouldn't be seen in coming weeks. Then John shot and killed his wife, Helen, his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, his 15-year-old son, John, his 13-year-old son, Frederick, and his mother, Alma, who was aged 85. They were all shot methodically one by one. Helen was shot first, but John saw the children off to school and then shot her in the back of the head in the kitchen as she sipped her customary morning coffee. Then he went up to the 3rd floor and murdered his mother in her bed. He gave her one final kiss and then shot her in the back of the head. He then went to the post office and the bank and then returned home to wait for his children. He killed Patricia when she returned home from school, then the youngest son, Frederick. He made himself a sandwich, closed out his bank accounts, and then went and cheered for his only surviving son, John, at his high school soccer game. He gave John a
Huh.
ride home and then shot him in the chest repeatedly.
Dude.
So the reason for this, John reportedly survived the first shot, and John List would later state that he didn't want his son to suffer, so he shot him multiple times. John then laid the bodies of his family on top of sleeping bags in the ballroom in the shape of a T, and then composed a note to his pastor who he felt would understand. He left his mother's body in the apartment in her attic, and he explained in a note he left behind that she was too heavy to move. Helen's mother was in fact ill and had canceled a visit to Westfield because of it. And had she had later made the trip, John later said she would have been his sixth victim. He feared his family, confronted with a world full of evil and poverty, would turn from God, and this was the only way to ensure their safe arrival in heaven. He was not, however, willing to suffer the earthly consequences for his actions, and in an effort to baffle the police, he cleaned the crime scenes and used scissors to remove his image from every photo in the mansion. He canceled all deliveries and contacted his children's schools to let their teachers know the family would be on vacation for a few weeks. He turned on the lights and the radio, leaving religious hymns playing in the house's empty rooms, and he slept in the mansion where his family lay dead, then walked out the door the next morning and wasn't seen again for 18 years.
Huh.
About a month passed before neighbors who were curious about the constantly burning lights and empty windows began to suspect something was wrong at the mansion. And when authorities entered the Westfield, New Jersey house on December 7th, 71, they heard organ music piped through the intercom system. They also found the 5-page note from John List explaining that the bloody bodies on the ballroom floor were his family members killed out of mercy. List wrote that he saw too much evil in the world and he had ended the lives of his wife, mother, and children to save their souls. There was a nationwide manhunt that was launched. Not only did the police have 5 bodies and the murder weapon, but a handwritten confession from the killer in reference to each one. And police investigated hundreds of leads but had no success. The FBI found his car parked at Kennedy International Airport in New York City, but they never found him, nor was there any evidence he boarded a flight. There was simply no trace of him in the United States or overseas. John List had planned the murders and escaped perfectly, and he managed to disappear into thin air before anyone even knew of the horrific acts which he had committed, and then the trail went cold. Fast forward 18 years to 1989, and New Jersey prosecutors had come up with a new plan. They had an expert forensics artist, Frank Bender, create a physical bust of John List as Bender imagined he might have aged. Bender gave him a hawk nose, grizzled eyebrows, and horn-rimmed glasses, and psychologists theorized that John would wear the same spectacles he wore as a younger man to remind him of those more successful days, and it was a masterful depiction of John List. When America's Most Wanted aired the story of the John List murders on May 21st, 1989, an audience of 22 million saw Frank Bender's sculpture, and then tips started pouring in. One tip came from a woman in Richmond, Virginia, who thought her next-door neighbor, Robert Clark, bore a striking resemblance to the bust. The tipster said her neighbor was also an accountant and attended church. Authorities went to the Clark's home and spoke with his wife, whom he had met at a church social gathering, and her story put an end to the 18-year-long mystery. It turned out that List had changed his identity and moved to Colorado under the assumed name Robert Clark, and the alias worked where he kept it when he moved to Richmond. In 1971, as the FBI later discovered, John had traveled by train from New Jersey first to Michigan, then to Colorado. He settled in Denver in early 1972 and took an accounting job under the name Robert Peter Bob Clark, one of his college classmates, although the real Bob Clark later stated he had never known John List. From 1979 to 1986, he was the comptroller at a paper box manufacturer outside of Denver. He joined a Lutheran congregation and ran a carpool for church members without transport. At one religious gathering, he met an Army PX clerk named Dolores Miller, and they were married in 1985. In February of 1988, the couple moved to a house in the Brander Mill neighborhood of Midlothian, Virginia, where John List, still using the name Bob Clark, resumed work as an accountant at a small accounting firm, Madrea, Joyner, Kirkham, and Woody. In 1972, John List was proposed as a suspect in the D.B. Cooper air piracy case because of the timing of his disappearance, which was 2 weeks prior to the airline hijacking. Multiple matches to the hijacker's description and the reasoning that a fugitive accused of mass murder has nothing to lose.
Haven't they found him like recently, the real D.B. Cooper?
I think you're right on that. Something triggers me
Yeah,
on
and
that. I think you're right.
it was something like, yeah, you guys were right. I parachuted out the back. I was fine, you know.
I
But
th-
he's
I
like dead now. But
I
they
think you're
finally
right.
were able to piece it all together.
I may have to look that up. Um, John List was questioned by FBI investigators after his capture, but he denied any involvement in the Cooper case.
Yeah.
His name is still occasionally mentioned in Cooper articles and documentaries, but there's no direct evidence that implicates him, and the FBI no longer considers him a suspect. I'll have to look that up about D.B. Cooper. Police in Virginia arrested mass murderer John List on June 1st, 1989, a mere 9 days after America's Most Wanted aired the case. That show was great.
Mm-hmm.
John List continued to stand by his alias for several months, even after his 1989 extradition to Union County, New Jersey. And finally, faced with irrefutable evidence, including a fingerprint match with John's military records, as well as evidence found at the crime scene, he confessed his true identity on February 16th, 1990. At his trial in 1990, defense lawyers argued that List suffered from PTSD from his military service in World War II and Korea. Expert psychologists believed, rather, that List was going through a midlife crisis, and as the prosecution pointed out, there was no excuse for killing 5 innocent people. His defense lawyers also tried painting John List as a man whose parents forced religion upon him, pushing him into a life of insanity, but the jury didn't buy it. On April 12, 1990, John List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing, he denied direct responsibilities for his actions, saying, quote, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." The
Great, but
judge
great, but you also covered it up and ran away for 18 years.
Exactly. I mean, the judge was unpersuaded. He said, quote, "John Emil List is without remorse and without honor. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave." He imposed a sentence of 5 terms of life imprisonment to be served consecutively, the maximum permissible penalty at the time. John List filed an appeal for his convictions again on the grounds that his judgment had been impaired by the post traumatic stress disorder due to his military service. And he also argued that the letter he left behind at the crime scene, essentially his confession, was confidential communication to his pastor and therefore inadmissible in evidence. A federal appeals court rejected both arguments. In an interview with Connie Chung in 2002, John List said he didn't kill himself after killing his own family because he felt that would prevent him from getting to heaven. All John wanted to do was reunite with his wife, mother, and children in the afterlife, where he believed there would be no pain and suffering. And also during the interview, he finally expressed a degree of remorse for his crimes, saying, quote, "I wish I had never done what I did." While in his remaining days behind the walls of a New Jersey State Correctional Facility, John List still hoped that he would go to heaven and prayed to this end every day. He also expressed hope to meet his family in the afterlife. He said, quote, "When we get to heaven, they'll either have forgiven me or won't realize what happened. I'm sure that if we recognize each other, we'll like each other's company, just like we did here when times were better." John List did die of complications from pneumonia at age 82 on March 21st, 2008, while imprisoned at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. In reporting his death, the New Jersey Star Ledger referred to him as the Boogeyman of Westfield. The mansion in New Jersey where John List lived with his family burned down several months after the murders. Authorities never found the cause of the fire, and a new house was built on the property years later. Although destruction was officially ruled arson, it remains unsolved with no suspects. Destroyed along with the home was the ballroom stained glass skylight,
Hmm.
which was rumored to be a signed Tiffany original, worth at least $100,000 at the time, or equivalent to $700,000 today.
Yep. And what's really sad is when they bought it from Tiffany, you know, the people originally. Yeah, it was probably expensive, but it wasn't anything more expensive than, oh, hey, I'm gonna get a skylight up here. I'm gonna
Right,
get it in stained glass. So
right.
yeah.
The memory of the murder still haunt the Westfield residents. In an interview in 2008, parents told a reporter in New Jersey that children will not walk past the property, nor do they even want to live on the same street.
Wow.
Over the years, John List and his crimes have furnished inspiration for documentaries, television dramas, and feature films. Examples include Savior, season 6, episode 16 of the television series Law and Order, the 1987 film The Stepfather and its 2009 remake, the 1993 film Judgment Day, the John List story, in which John List was portrayed by Robert Blake, and the character Kaiser Soze in the 1995 film The Usual Suspects is based off John List.
Kaiser Soze.
Yep. 1996 episode of the series Forensics Files discussed the List murder. There was a 2003 episode of the A&E series American Justice, which also detailed the case and featured an interview with John List. In 2015, the story was covered in the season 2, episode 2 of the investigation discovery series Your Worst Nightmare. The episode Murder House premiered on November 18th, 2015. A movie, A Killer Next Door, is based on the events that led to the capture of John List and was released in July of 2020. And finally, in 2022, Netflix released a 7-part dramatic fictional series called The Watcher. Although it's a work of fiction, much of the character John Graff was borrowed from the story of the John List murders. The character of John Graff was played by Joe Mantello and was identical to John List in several ways, such as in being an accountant, attending a Lutheran church, and murdering his family and live-in mother, along with leaving music playing in the house and playing an alibi that would cause the bodies to remain undiscovered for several weeks. And that's the story of John List.
Well, thank you, sir. That was fascinating.
Yeah, one of the most famous family annihilators. We've covered at least a couple of them before, maybe 3, but John List is one of the most famous. I've had him on my list of stories to tell for some time now. So finally dove into that one. So awesome! Thanks for taking that journey with me.
Thank you.
That'll take us to the end of another recording week. As always, you can find more about us on our website, nerderymurdery.com. That's our hub, our website for everything about the show. We have links to what we talked about in this episode, plus pictures about the topic we discussed. You can also find the link to our YouTube page, which Zig so often updates.
Yes, our YouTube page, which will have videos of things that we talked about, some snippets from the movie, some of the stuff from the other things, and things that we think are fun.
Awesome.
As well as for our music episodes, we also have Spotify playlists, yes. So you can go listen to music and the episode.
Yes, appreciate your work on that. Also on our website, you can find the link to our merchandise, where if you wish to show off your Nerdery Murdery fandom, please do consider purchasing some merchandise there. You can also find the link to our Patreon, where our patrons, along with our merchandise sales, do go to the costs of this show. It helps us keep going. There are costs that are associated with keeping the show on the air, so please do consider purchasing some merchandise or becoming a patron to our show. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It helps us and helps others find our content to hear the topics we're discussing. So with that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdering.
Cue the music.